Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And if you have been paying much attention to our Facebook or YouTube, you've already seen me for over an hour this afternoon. We just finished up our YA thriller event, and now I am back on here to introduce and host a historical fiction event with Simon Turney, Gordon Doherty, and Kate Quinn. Before I bring them on here, I'm going to go over just a few upcoming events, particularly if you like historical fiction or historical mystery. On Tuesday afternoon, we'll be back with one of our favorite English authors, Ellie Griffiths. She'll be here Tuesday afternoon to discuss the Postscript murders. We'll also be back on Thursday afternoon with S.J. Bennett to discuss her debut novel or debut mystery that features Queen Elizabeth as the sleuth, The Windsor Knot. Also, we have a lot of fans of our Murder by the Book Recommends series, where basically it's just the staff of Murder by the Book from home talking about our favorite books and things that are forthcoming. So we're doing our spring installment next Friday, I guess this coming Friday, this coming Saturday, March 13th. So you can tune in for that also. It'll be on Facebook and YouTube. We also have a pretty cool event with Harlan Coben and Michael J. Fox coming up, but you can check out our whole event calendar at murderbooks.com. If you have any questions and you're watching on YouTube, you can pop those in the live chat. If you have questions on Facebook, just put them in the comments and we'll get to them in just a little bit. I'm also, as soon as I get the authors introduced, I'll drop a link to information and an ordering platform for Sons of Rome and the Rose Code. So it is now time to bring out our authors. We have Simon Turney and Gordon Doherty. Let me get those added. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I'm going to do your bio really quickly. So Simon Turney is the author of the Marius Mules and Praetorian series, as well as the Damned Emperor series for Orion and Tales of the Empire series for Canelo. He is based in Yorkshire. Thank you for joining us. All right. Gordon Doherty is the author of the Legionary and Strategos series and wrote the Assassin's Creed tie-in novel Odyssey, which I was just chatting about with ahead of time. I'm quite the Assassin's Creed fan. He's based in Scotland, and they are here today to talk with us about their new book, Sons of Rome. Thank you for being here, Gordon. All right, Kate. Many of you will recognize Kate Quinn. We have hosted her on here before. She's a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice. She has written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome Saga and 2 books in the Italian Renaissance, before turning to the 20th century with the Alice Network and the Huntress. Kate and her husband now live in San Diego with 2 rescue dogs, and she also has a brand new release, although it's not necessarily the focus of today's event, called The Rose Code. Thank you so much for being here, Kate, and thank you also for being our interviewer and moderator. It makes my life easy because I get to just go off screen, sit back, and listen. So the 3 of you know each other well. I'm sure it'll be a fun, engaging talk, and I'm just going to go away and leave you to it. Have fun.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I'm sure we'll all do our best to live up or live down to it. Everybody who's watching, please, if you haven't already, grab your copy of Sons of Rome. You can order from Murder by the Book, where they will ship wherever you are living, and they will also be including a special autographed book plate. So you want to definitely do your ordering from them. So for you guys, since I figure we can get a little bit about the book first for anybody who's watching, and no spoilers, because we know you may not have had a chance to read yet. Do you mind if I just gush about it a little bit first, and then we can get into the question part?
By all means.
Yes, please.
Well, Sons of Rome is really a book that I enjoyed so much. It's later empire than I'm used to generally seeing in my own wheelhouse when I was writing in the ancient world. It is where you're starting to get into the empire moving east, Constantinople is now going to start becoming the bigger, and the eastern cities are the bigger focus. And you have the reign of Diocletian, which is where you have the emperor who had the bright idea of introducing the tetrarchy, which is where the empire is really too big for one man. So let's split it into two, Eastern Empire, Western, and each half is governed by two emperors. You have a senior called an Augustus, a junior called a Caesar. And this was one of those ideas that sounded so great on paper. Except that what it really meant was that when you once just had one emperor's chair to be jockeying for, now there were four. And so you had really 4 times the claimants and 4 times the trouble. And that's where we kick off really with Sons of Rome, where you introduce to Constantine and to Maxentius, who are 2 young men when we first meet them, very young, and they're the sons of powerful men. They meet as, really almost children, and they're at the cusp of what their futures will become, and they're going to diverge into different paths, but they never forget this meeting that they've had. Constantine, already a young warrior, Maxentius, a young, thoughtful man who's already thinking about building projects and, civic obligations, and what does being Roman really mean. And these 2 never forget each other. They're going to be linked by blood, by friendship. But then there's this little problem that in the end, there's only going to be one emperor's chair available, and both of them are going to have their eye on it. So as we move into that, it's the tale of 2 friends who are going to end up facing each other as enemies at some point. And it's, how is that exactly going to unfold? And I find it fascinating. So let's dive into, first of all, just how do you 2 know each other, and how did you decide to collaborate? I know some of this story, but I know a lot of the viewers won't.
Are you going to take this, Gordon?
Yeah, well, I guess it began with a cancelled history festival.
A wet weekend in Northamptonshire.
Yeah, and so living in Scotland, as I do, that involved something like a 9-hour drive down to Northampton, only to find out that the festival we had driven to was called off. So it was a bit of a disaster for me at that point. But then I got to, as an alternative, I got to spend the entire weekend in the pub with Simon and lots of other friends. So every cloud, as they say. And yeah, we spent that weekend drinking a lot, chatting a lot, telling a lot of bad jokes. And then from somewhere amidst all of that, we came up with a notion of, let's do something together. Can we make that work? Initially that was, I think, the seed of the idea. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences in the way we write, but our writing careers had been quite parallel up to then, I think it's fair to say. How can we come together?
Gordon and I knew each other already anyway from years of using a peer review website where we would sort of check over each other's work and give ideas and thoughts, bounce ideas backwards and forwards, and with other writers as well. But we knew each other for years before this. So just having met up, it was just there was bound to be a collision of ideas and and notions as to what we could do. And I remember sitting the last morning before we were leaving the hotel at the wet weekend, just sitting there saying, we can do it, can't we? We could do this, can't we?
Now, the thing I find surprising is not that you would have hit it off immediately and that there would have been ideas sparking like mad and, brilliant collaborations, ideas coming out of this. I'm just amazed anyone remembered it in the morning because last time I ended up on a weekend with Simon in York when my husband and I were going through on a tour. I'm not sure anybody remembered anything the following morning. We were just lucky the city wasn't on fire. But I'm really glad that this collaboration came out of it instead. And I really have to ask, you have these 2 heroes, and I know one of you wrote each of the heroes. I'll let you decide whether you want to say here which of you wrote which, or whether you want to leave that as a bit of a surprise. But why these 2 particular heroes, and what drew you to them, and did you have to arm wrestle over whom wrote whom?
I think we have to give this one away, Gordon. Yeah.
Yeah, let's reveal all.
Right. For me, the whole notion of Maxentius and Constantine is that they are 2 entirely opposed forces. The idea that they were childhood friends and everything expanded from there is ours. But the fact is that Constantine is a force of change. everything about him is a force of change in Rome. With him, there'll be new Rome founded in the East, Christianity accepted, there'll be the disbanding of the Praetorian Guards, a whole shift of focus in Rome completely. Maxentius, although he's demonized in the Christian sources, when you look at the archaeological record, Maxentius is much more attempting to return to tradition. He's a traditional Roman in the mold of Augustus or Trajan or the Flavian emperors, who had huge building projects in Rome, and everything was Romanitas this, Romanitas that. And I think that it's the clash of these two that makes it fascinating. And for me, Maxentius, for all that he did amazing things, has come through as the underdog, and I love an underdog. So yeah, I'm Maxentius. This guy, wrong way. This guy.
This guy. Yeah, so yeah, Simon was Maxentius, and it really just felt like a natural choice for me to try Constantine. So it's maybe something to do with, our existing works. I had really focused on the later Roman Empire, the late 4th century, and Simon had largely focused on the sort of Republican, earlier imperial era. And I think it was, Constantine, as Simon said quite rightly, was a force of change and precipitated that metamorphosis from the High Principate into late antiquity, that sort of the dominate as it's known. Obviously Diocletian was a big player in that as well. He probably triggered the change there. But it just felt like, he's the man who brought about, Constantine was the man who brought about and finalised the complete reshaping of the legions, and as you say, the move away from Rome to Constantinople. And that thing, Maxentius was very much Roman, as in Rome, the city. And Constantine, by forming the new Rome, was, almost the diametrically opposed. So it was a perfect fit for me to go for Constantine. And I love writing the military side of things, the campaign trail and out in the wild woods fighting the Goths and in the desert attacking the Persian Empire and all of that. So that was just spot on for me.
Well, the thing I think that I really love, and this is something I have some experience with because I've also done some collaboratives, but when you're writing your own book, and let me know if this is your experience too, you have to sort of be and especially if you have multiple characters, you have to keep each point of view in mind. You need to be able to argue each side, if you have, like, say, 2 characters and you're writing both. But the fun part about collaboratives is that you can wholeheartedly take your side, the side of your character. And, that's one thing I definitely observed about this is that, when I'm reading Gordon's parts in Sons of Rome, you are wholeheartedly, all in behind, the new man, the new direction, the new way in which to view the empire. And then when I read Simon's part with Maxentius, it is absolutely, it's like Roman gravitas all the way. Let's look back and, restore the glory of what it used to be under, Hadrian and Trajan and all of them. And so I could see that passion in both of you that, you could go wholeheartedly for your side. So did you ever have any of those fun discussions where you're sort of, you almost are, you're arguing with each other the way that your characters would be arguing with each other about, the direction Rome should go?
I don't know. I found one of the most interesting parts about writing this was that I gained a lot of sympathy for Maxentius through understanding Simon's portrayal of the man. I didn't know half as much about Maxentius as I do now, so I maybe went into the project with a kind of a bias for Constantine, but I definitely gained a much more neutral viewpoint across the board.
I think the same happened both ways round. I think we just the way we've each sort of portrayed the emperors has given each of us a chance to sympathise or to empathise with both emperors, because they are, as I say, two sides of a coin. Both men were great men of power, but they just had different directions. And neither of them are villains, whatever history tells us. Neither of them were heroes or villains. They were both men. So the more you unearth the thing, the more you unwrap the characters, the more you appreciate the fact that there is no black or white, they're just people. And the more you can sort of get inside their heads. I think with what we've written, every time I read what Gordon had written in a chapter before, I could get inside Constantine's head, and I could then wrap my head around how Maxentius would see that. And I suspect the same as the other way around.
It gave me a sense of frustration sometimes, because I kept thinking, if only you two could read this book, and see what's going on in the other man's head, you wouldn't be having these problems with each other that you are by the end. If only they could have, sat down and had that talk, had that peek into the other person's head. But how many times can you say that about history when, if only people could have known what the other was thinking?
Yes, one of the analogies I often describe this book as I don't know if you have it over in the States, but a childhood game where you get a piece of paper and there's two players, and the first person draws a head, and then you fold up the paper just at the neck, and then the next person draws the body, and you fold the paper again, so each person doesn't know what the last person has drawn. And then you draw the legs and then the feet, and then you unveil it, and you get this kind of crazy creature. And it's just that complete lack of understanding of the other person's point of ideas or thoughts that results in this monster. And that's essentially what the world of Constantine and Maxentius was. I don't think, from what I understand of both characters, I don't think either of them wanted the cataclysm that came about, or necessarily the way it came about. But yeah, there's definitely a sense of sort of sadness, about the way that these two men ended up becoming such fierce rivals.
When in fairness, both of them were passed over by men who were more powerful and more despicable than them by any stretch of the imagination. They should have been very much brothers in arms against the higher powers. And they ended up instead at each other's throats, fighting over one throne.
So that actually leads me, speaking of, fighting over the same pages, the same throne, how did you approach the collaborative process? You each had, a different viewpoint to write, but did you do a lot of outlining in advance? Did you sort of shoot it back and forth, like, do the hot potato principle, you have it for a while, then you toss it back and then so forth? Or how did you approach that? Especially considering both of you also have solo work and other deadlines to be juggling at the same time.
Gordon or me?
I really should be better about designating, shouldn't I? Simon, Artie, you start this one.
We had a very good chapter plan. Both of us are a little bit OCD in the way we deal with absolutely everything we write. A little bit OCD. So our chapter plan, by the time we actually got round sitting and writing, our chapter plan was ridiculous. We had a Dropbox file that had everything down to a folder full of characters with descriptions of the characters, with their eye color and where their grandfather was born and all this kind of thing. So you couldn't sort of get continuity errors between characters. So the level of organization when we started just meant once we actually started, it just rolled, I think. And once that happened, we would talk to each other sort of once a week, once a fortnight, and say, I've got my Thursday's free. I'm going to take the script on Thursday. I'm going to write my chapter. And then I would finish it, and Gordon would say, Tuesday, I've got a free day. I'll read through and edit yours, and then I'll go my chapter. And it would roll with periods of meeting up and drinking far too much beer to work out what was going right and what was going wrong and correct.
Yeah, and there's a wee bit, I would say, there was a little bit of sort of freeform there as well, in that, I could be writing, say, my chapter to the chapter plan, and then, of course, if a really juicy idea appeared while I was writing, say, the last paragraph or something, it was almost like throwing down the gauntlet for Simon. I would finish it on an absolute bombshell, just like, yes, what do you make of that then? Send it back to Simon and see what he could do in retaliation. And it was brilliant. It was
You know what the best one of those was? It's not actually in Sons of Rome. It comes in the sequel. In the chapter plan, there is a moment where it says, Constantine says something unforgivable.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually said what it was. It's just it was just left for him to decide when he was writing what it would be.
And when I came to that point, it was pretty horrible. So job done. Yeah.
I think I've had that kind of experience too, often with research stuff where it's like you end up, if it's streaming along and you don't want to stop and look something up, so you have the thing where it's like insert witty comment here, or insert historically accurate banquet menu here, or whatever it is that you want to do, but you just got to keep going.
Yeah.
So how about the research? You mentioned a little bit, just that you had these Dropboxes, files. I'm seeing a lot of Excel spreadsheet sort of things happening, which warms my heart. I'm quite a lot of an outliner as well. But how did you handle the research on this, as far as, the books that you needed to consult, and how you needed to, pool your resources? Maybe Gordon, want to start with this one?
Yeah, I guess, we've both got our own systems of how to go about gathering and cataloguing the information. And it was, for me, book-wise, I usually try to identify at least, a set of core sources, and really just digest them and distill them so that becomes my sort of core of knowledge. And then, it's just, it's perusing the big libraries in Glasgow here, down to the British Library, and just scouring the web and just building up like an onion an understanding of the characters, which is really quite hard, I'll say, for probably for Maxentius and Constantine, but particularly Constantine being one of history's giants. We know very, very little about him, especially his early life. It's a bit of a black box, which made it quite tricky. But the research was absolutely vital for that reason, because there are just a few pieces of information about him which completely changed my view of the man Constantine, as opposed to Constantine the Great, Constantine the man, which is the thing I was trying to really, really get to grips with. So yeah, that's a bit of maybe a bit tangential, but the research was intense and continuous throughout the series. And the only thing that I really regret is that we didn't get the chance to go to Trier, Augusta Treverorum, which was Constantine's capital, during the writing of the project. But it's in both of our bucket lists to go there, I think, and raise a glass of red wine to both
as I make a media and various other places.
Yeah, it's going to be a grand tour of Europe, basically.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the problem I think with the research is that you can do a vast amount of research into, say, Rome and Trier and the physical locations, and also into the army of the time and the armor, the weapons, the politics. But when it comes down to the men themselves, the sources are very scant, even as Gordon said, for Constantine, and for Maxentius even less. And Constantine has been essentially grown to being Saint Constantine in all the sources. Everything is because God was on his side when you look back on the sources, because the sources were written by the Christian writers after Constantine's time, after Constantine's rise. Whereas Maxentius, of course, is the great demon because he was Constantine's enemy. So it's I think half the job at least is just unpicking the untruths that are clearly the work of biographers afterwards.
It almost seems like you have opposite problems here, because with Constantine, there's a tremendous amount of information, but so much of it is propaganda that you have to sort of try to find the kernel that's actually, the human kernel inside of that. And then with Maxentius, there's much less information. And so you have less to work with just as a whole, and then you're still trying to find that kernel. I think it's a problem with when you write in the ancient world, it's the question of what has survived for us to even look at is so much of a bigger question. I have to say I do miss it from the days when now I'm writing about the 20th century, and it's like I have 300 books about an Enigma machine on my shelf, and then it's like I really miss the days when, if it wasn't Dio or Josephus, that was it. So I do think I do kind of envy the research going back, even though I know you had a mass amount of it as well, and it's not just as simple as, well, much less survived. Now, as far as research goes, did you have any particular tidbits you really enjoyed finding in your research which didn't make it into the book, or at least didn't make it into this book? Anything that ended up on the cutting room floor or that you couldn't shoehorn in?
Cool.
Well, this is maybe one for you, Simon. I was thinking of the legend of St. Catherine, and the firework known as the Catherine wheel, that spins round. And, yeah. So do you want to?
St. Catherine of Alexandria, in some peculiar story, St. Catherine of Alexandria, in the hagiography, obviously, of St. Catherine, she comes to Rome to argue the case for Christians with Maxentius, who is obviously portrayed as the greatest anti-Christian in the history of the world. Excuse me, I'm getting feedback. I'm just going to turn that down. So St. Catherine turns up and she marshals her arguments and she gets an audience with Maxentius, and she puts forward her position, and Maxentius calls forth every learned man he can gather to argue against her, and they all fail dismally in the face of this young princess from Alexandria, who angers Maxentius so much he basically takes her away and has her head cut off. A story that's very much ruined by all sorts of things, like there wasn't a princess in Alexandria at the time, so that's clearly rubbish. Maxentius is, if you look at the actual historical record rather than the writers, doesn't appear to have had anything against the Christians. There's just that it's one of those horribly apocryphal stories that's risen purely because he has been villainized by history.
Yeah, I'm thinking whoever wrote that hagiography did not have to deal with armchair experts on Twitter who would have been pointing out, all the places they got it wrong, and that's a shame almost.
The thing that I discovered that I absolutely loved, sorry, I'm hijacking this for myself, really, ignoring Gordon, but the thing that I loved in research-wise was discovering that Maxentius was the last emperor to build in Rome on a large scale. He was in the form of Augustus completely rebuilt Rome in the image he wanted. The Flavians took Nero's Rome and rebuilt it the way they wanted. Trajan had his architect Apollodorus of Damascus, and he rebuilt Rome on a grand scale. And it's happened a few times over history, usually by the great emperors. The last one was Maxentius, and he should have been one of those great emperors were it not for the fact that he was beaten but Maxentius completely rebuilt a number of buildings in the Forum. He was the last person to reside on the Palatine Hill and the last person to build there. Most of the things that are in Rome that are assigned to Constantine are actually probably Maxentius's works that Constantine finished for him. But the one that I really love is there's a very famous statue of Constantine that's in pieces, a Colossus of Constantine in the museum in Rome, and you can find it on any Google image search. A huge face and a hand doing this, where are we, and a foot and things of Constantine. And there's been a lot of research done on this statue, and it's been reworked from an older statue, an earlier statue, but a recent one. And there's a very good chance that it was either a statue of Maxentius or a statue possibly of Maxentius' son that was voted by the governor of Sardinia. So you're looking at the world of 312 AD Rome has Constantine stamped all over it, but most of what's stamped on is Maxentius' buildings.
That is fabulous. And I always appreciated that Roman thriftiness where they used to just, chisel the new face onto an old statue. Just why bother wasting all that perfectly good marble, right? I remember that because when I was writing about Emperor Hadrian once, it's like if you've seen one bearded, Antonine Emperor, my God, you've seen them all. I mean, all these bearded statues in a row. And one of the fun things I learned was that the identifying marker for Hadrian was that he had a diagonal crease on the earlobe, which actually it's a genetic marker for heart disease, which he very probably died of. It's not a sure thing, but it's one of the indicators. And so the first thing you do, I would started doing with all those bearded emperor statues, was looking at the ears, because generally speaking, if you saw the crease, you knew it was Hadrian. But not everybody has that. So it's, sometimes it is, a little tricky to try to figure out who's who when they've started recutting all those features. Oh, go ahead.
Just remind me. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the details, but literally yesterday or the day before, there was a news article about it was a Mithraeum or a temple somewhere where it was an emperor cult temple where they had discovered like the body, shoulders, and neck of an emperor statue or bust with a kind of hinged part for the head, so it was designed to be replaced. So it wasn't that kind of post hoc thing where they chipped the face off. It was just an emperor body. Switch heads every time there's a usurpation or a civil war or an assassination. It was actually designed for change. I just thought that was quite,
times like the year of the 6 emperors, that would save a lot of marble.
That's perfect. Yeah, they would have been selling like hotcakes, those statues. Yeah.
There is something so quintessentially Roman about that. In any case, I did want to ask you, and I'll punt this one over to Gordon first, but did you have a favorite scene writing in this book? Like anything that you particularly relished putting down?
Yeah, there's two. There's two I would say. There was it's not the nicest scene in terms of the content, but the point where as you say, it begins with Constantine and Maxentius's children, and then there's a kind of a passage of time, and I think we start in part 2 where Constantine is now in his ascendancy. He's a famous officer in the legions under Galerius, the horrible Galerius, and part 2 starts in media res with Galerius's legions and Constantine against the Persians, storming this kind of last stand of the Shahanshah and his royal guard atop a mountain, and it's just a brutal battle scene. But then, as I say, the content's pretty horrific. But Galerius shows the kind of character he is by he captures the Shahanshah's wife and does something pretty horrible there. But there's the Constantine and his military mentor. He's a fictional character, Batius. They kind of break up what's going on, and it's just that whole the intensity of writing that scene and trying to deal with something that was quite unsavoury. I thought that it kind of taught me a lot about how to handle things that are quite difficult to write about. There was that, and then there was again involving Galerius. Maybe a mild spoiler here, but when Galerius tried to break up Maxentius' rise to power and failed miserably, there's a scene where Constantine intercepts him on the way home with his tail between his legs, miserable, dejected, diseased, like all of his troops, starving. And Constantine has in his hands at that moment the power. He could do something that could change the course of history. I'm not going to say what he does, but that was a really kind of pivotal scene to write. I'm trying really hard not to give spoilers. I really want to, but
how about you, Simon?
In book 1, there are in Sons of Rome, there are 2 scenes or sequences rather than scenes, I think, that I love. One is early on when Constantine and Maxentius are children. It's a whole series where Maxentius, as a boy, probably about 6 or 7, I think, at the time, is building a wooden city out of wooden blocks on the floor of a palace while his father's doing imperial things in another room with a huge group of nobles. And he's just building this wooden city, and then, he gets bullied. Constantine comes in and helps, and it's just the exchange and the whole notion that Maxentius is this builder and Constantine's advising him that feeds a lot of what happens in the next 3 books. And I think I love that scene, and I love what it gave us. It's an origin story for our superheroes, and I love that. The other one I like is
the radioactive spider scene.
Exactly. The other one I love is when Annalena, the Praetorian prefect, is continually badgering Maxentius, saying, "Take the purple robe, be an emperor, sort out Rome." And every time he turns up, Maxentius is slamming the door in his face, going, "Go away! I just want to sit and enjoy my life. Go away!" And it just happens again and again and again. And the pace and the urgency with which it keeps sort of increasing, I just love that sequence as well.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You had, one man who was a bit more of a driver toward what he wanted, and then you had Maxentius as a little bit more of your reluctant hero. Except even he, at some point, is going to hit a spot where he's like, I do want this. I deserve this. I should have this. And the thing is, he's right, and they're both right, and they've both been passed over. For men who are, frankly, much less competent than they are, which was the great irony, of course. So the story in Sons of Rome is nowhere near done. So what does the future hold for you guys?
We've got it's a trilogy. And so we've got a book 2, Masters of Rome, and a book 3, Gods of Rome, all coming very soon. And so that's going to tell the tale of Constantine and Maxentius up to, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, up to a very, very, very important turning point in history.
Fairly famous event.
Yeah.
Well, considering we're a few thousand years out, I think, spoiler alert, we can say, spoiler alert, somebody's going to become emperor. I mean, is that really really a spoiler?
I think the way I look at them is I look at all trilogies in light of Star Wars. Every trilogy is a Star Wars. The first episode is the finding and the setting the scene, the adventure. The second episode is the dark one, the character building, the one where everything deepens. And the third one is the exciting one that ties everything together. And I think Sons of Rome is our introduction. It's our adventure. I think Masters of Rome is our Empire Strikes Back. I think it's darker. I think there's a lot more depth of character. I think it tells the story of their struggles as they try and cling on to their power in the face of each other and other outside influences. And then when you move to book 3, it's the cataclysm that's coming, where there's the 2 of them are ascendant.
And I'm going to give away a spoiler. At the end, Maxentius picks up Constantine and throws him down the shaft of the Death Star. Sorry, I had to do it. So.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was going to say, I was going to be extremely disappointed if in Masters of Rome someone doesn't lose a hand in a lightsaber duel. I mean, what are you doing? We don't have that. All right. I think we're going to be taking questions very soon, but I will ask real quick, just because I think it's a question I've been interested to hear about from all the writers I've been talking to. But how has it been like for you guys to write during COVID and during the particular pressures that has put on, our lives? Because I think it's something that, at least for me, it's like, on one way, if you work at home already, your life doesn't change much, but I think a lot has changed anyway. So how is it like for you guys? Simon, do you want to start with that one?
Do you mean us two writing together or writing our own stuff?
Well, I'd say both. I mean, what was it? Did it make it harder to write this together? And also just what were the challenges for you personally, just writing during the last time?
We'd actually finished the manuscript of Gods of Rome, the third one, before COVID hit. So
nice.
All we've done during the COVID era is editing and promotions, which I mean, everything is done these days. Most of it's done online anyway. So I don't think it's been much of an issue. Personally, writing has plummeted, particularly with children being at home and homeschooled. So I'm spending most of my time going and sorting out, basically being the UN, going and sorting out small wars around the house and then the dog leaping at me and things. But we're getting there. I think we're getting there. Working at home anyway, I got hit so much less hard than most people. So I just have to be grateful, really.
Mm. How about you, Gordon?
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess the biggest issue is the lack of creative input, if that makes sense. You know, I'm desperately missing the chance to go abroad, and just not necessarily even abroad, just to Roman ruins in Scotland or England, you know, and to have the research trip buzz, the experience, the input, the sensory input that really helps fuel the outputs. You know, I'm finding, I'm thinking that my next book might involve some Romans going to the same park every single day for an hour and not much else. It is difficult, but even just really simple things. Simon and myself were chatting about it the other day. You know, even just being on a bus and you overhear a conversation and there's a turn of phrase or an expression, a facial expression even, that totally just seeds itself in your mind, and you think that's just perfect to kick off a scene, or, you know, it's just so evocative that I'm going to use that. You know, it's like the comparison I think I used is like being a writer is like being a magpie. You pick out little nuggets of life and put them into your book, and life is quite limited at the moment, so it is a bit of an issue. But I am writing, but same as Simon, a lot less than I was pre-COVID.
Well, I know we've got some questions from the audience, so do we want to invite some of those in and see where we go from here?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a lot of questions from Arlene, and then we have some other questions too. But before we get to that, I was hoping, since you have a book coming out Tuesday, The Rose Code, right? I was hoping you could talk a little bit about it.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't prepared to quite as much to gush about anything that was 20th century rather than being way back in the past, but I'll do my best. I have things falling over in the background. This is The Rose Code, it's my copy that just came out. It is about the women code breakers of Bletchley Park. And I was very fortunate that I was able to go see Bletchley before the world shut down and do some research there. But I'm fascinated by the code breaking during World War II activity, which was one of the great unsung achievements at the time, and probably one of the big turning points of the war, without which the Allies wouldn't have won. But I have three very different women who are all called in 1940 to come work at Bletchley Park, and who are drawn together as friends and then driven apart by the pressures of secrecy and code-breaking work, and have to reunite after the war to break one last code and to root out the traitor that they realize has been operating in their midst since their wartime Bletchley years. So that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. I am always intrigued by the code breaking too, and also got the opportunity to visit Bletchley a few years ago. And when the world reopens, for those of you who like history, I highly recommend a visit there. The exhibits and everything are fascinating. So, okay, on to the questions. Susan was wondering, what about this time period intrigued you? So that we're going to go back to Rome. How about you, Gordon?
Yeah, it was in a nutshell, I think it was the culmination of the series, the thing that sees these two one-time friends come together in animosity and clashing swords. So it's a bit of a spoiler, you know, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and we always saw that as a bit of a metaphor for the transition between the early empire and later antiquity, you know, as in a bridge between time, as well as the physical place where this great battle took place. And it really kind of, with the two characters involved, it kind of spread backwards to their childhoods from there. And I think that's what that kind of encapsulated the period for us, and that was the indicator that was the right thing for Simon and myself to work on.
It was a lovely sort of meeting point in that Gordon has been writing about 4th century legionaries, and I've been writing about sort of 1st and 2nd century Roman officers, and really the end of the 2nd, start of the end of the 3rd, start of the 4th century is very much a sort of meeting point of where we were, where our interests lie. So, sorry, you were 4th century, I say, Gordon, rather.
Yeah.
So it's a joint world for us, really.
Perfect. So on that same note, are there any further collaboration plans for the two of you?
Go for it,
Gordon. Take that one. Yeah, whoever.
Yeah, I really hope so. We've got a big stack of plans, and one absolute standout candidate that I think is going to be an absolute blockbuster. The only issue is the old one, time. It's just time and organising our other commitments to allow it to happen. That's the only thing that's standing in the way of it. And
it will happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait.
Okay, so just because the way that it'll post on the screen will cover people, I'm going to just recite a couple questions from Arlene. So she has several questions about the collaborative process. One is, what challenges have you faced? And also, what happens when there are conflicts that arise between friendship and power?
Swords at dawn.
Why don't we start with Simon this time?
Not the authors. Conflicts. I don't think we really had any conflicts that in terms of the writing. The whole story is about conflicts between the two characters and how they're constantly resolved. And I think that's more or less the beauty of the story, is it's one constant conflict that's grown out of a friendship that just couldn't be maintained. And that's what's given us the depth for the characters.
Can I add something, actually?
Please.
Yeah.
Obviously every collaboration is different, and, yours, I don't know what yours looked like on the inside, but having done a number of collaboratives before, and I did one with Simon too, is that the beauty about collaboration when you have people who you are really on the same wavelength is that, two heads are always better than one. So if you hit a roadblock somewhere, or if you have an honest difference of opinion maybe about where to take an idea, talking it out means that you're going to be able to, your brains put together are going to find a solution that is better than either one could come up with on its own. At least that's been my experience. And it's a wonderful feeling because, when you really work well together with someone else and your brains are sort of running in unison, like, horses on a chariot, there's a kind of feel where, like if you can feel your writing partner leaning in a certain direction and you're already thinking, yes, I know where you're trying to go with that. Let me add on to that. Let me lean in with you and see where it goes. And it's a really exciting thing about writing together because you end up going in all these directions that maybe you never would have done on your own. At least that's.
I think there was a lot of that. I think Gordon and our writing style is very similar, and I think our outlook is very similar. So I don't think we ever sort of butted heads over what we wanted to do with the characters over 3 books, did we?
No, I think, yeah, Kate, you summed it up very well. It was a kind of an intuitive, a kind of affinity, empathy thing. You could feel the sort of swell of where things were going, and it just felt like a natural course. I don't think there was any collision points where it was like, no, firmly, I'm not doing that, and I think we need to rewrite this chapter because it's not how I saw that event in history. It was very, very fluid. It was surprisingly, I thought we might have a few points of contention.
if anything,
did you see if I could think of something where?
I think you're not going to get into collaboration in the first place if you don't have at least an idea of like, okay, I can be flexible, I can work with something. So if you're already coming in with that attitude, that does a lot. I mean, I think people who are really, really rigidly fixed on their own pole star probably aren't going to do this kind of project, or they're just going to have nothing but headaches. But when you're already walking into it with that idea that you're willing to bend and go with the flow a little bit, it's really exciting when you hook your mind up with somebody else's and you realize that you work together really well and that your minds are jumping ahead on the same track. It's kind of like it's got the kind of feeling of it's like you're finding it's like when you're finding, like if you find a soulmate for, romantically, that's one thing, but there's something else, almost a kind of excitement in like you found a partner in creativity. And there's a sort of like excitement about that at the same time, I've found. So it's a very cool thing to have to happen. And I can see why people, if you've worked together well once, you're probably going to work together again. So I'm looking forward to seeing what else you guys put out.
There was one thing that leaps to mind is at one point, I forget when it was when we were writing, there had been a sort of 4 or 5 month break for one reason or another where we were too busy to get to the manuscript, and we spent months without working on it. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I just don't know where to pick it up now because it's been so long. And we arranged a meetup because we met up at least 2-3 times a year during the whole process. We arranged a meetup. We walked in, and I think when I walked into the meetup, I was thinking, don't know where we're going to go from here. In the space of about an hour, ideas were flowing, the whole thing had begun again, and I just couldn't wait to get started again. And I think that's sort of endemic of the whole process for us. I think it was just, it cannonballed every time we spoke. It cannonballed, it was snowballed even rather, into months of sort of deep work.
It was almost, there was the meetups, and then even just the working individually, remotely. So when I received a chapter from you, Simon, I might be working on my Legionary series, say, and at first you get that kind of sense of that's a diversion. But I always found that opening up the manuscript and reading what you had written was like just lighting the blue touch paper. It was like, here we go. I can't wait to follow up with my own answer to that. It was the perfect kind of, as I say, creative input, reading your latest. So, yeah.
That's great. Again, you've probably already just covered this, but Patricia was wondering if there's a specific characteristic that you think is critical when selecting a partner to undertake something like this. I think Kate already said someone who's not, their own pole star, but anything else?
I think maybe to use a kind of horribly business-like term, someone who is delivery focused, is interested in putting something and creating something as opposed to becoming overly concerned about deep analysis and kind of churning over and over and over. Let's get something and then work with it, as opposed to being stuck at the drawing board kind of thing.
It's also, I think, knowing that the person you're going to be working with works not just the same sort of way as you, but their writing style, their focus are all kind of on a line. Because Gordon and I, as I say, we've known each other for years. Our first series came out. He was writing Legionary. I was writing Marius Mules. They're both Roman military. We had very much a crossover in our readership. So we knew that readers were reading our work together. So we knew that there's got to be a certain sort of easy combination there.
Yeah.
I'd say too, probably you need someone who works in not just like a similar sort of field and style, but do they also have the same, some of the same working patterns as you do? Not that you couldn't make it work maybe if one person is a very, intense plotter and one person is like, well, I just write the scene and see where it takes me. You might be able to make that work. But I think it might be easier if you have two not that there's one right way or one wrong, but if you have two people who are both very go with the flow, they work together. And if you have people who need to lay things out in Excel spreadsheets and make sure that outline is really in place before you put a word in, they're probably better off working with somebody like them. And I speak as somebody who likes to plot out. So it probably is better when you have someone whose style of writing, not just your prose style, but the style in which you like to write is somewhat, similar to yours as well. There probably will be headaches involved.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense from a practical standpoint as well. Okay, a couple more questions. And I think all three of you certainly have experience to answer this. How deeply do you inhabit your characters and the time period, and does it ever make it hard to reorient yourself back to the present day reality? Kate, why don't you start with this one?
Oh Lord. Yeah, there can be sort of a you're stuck in your world sometimes, and it can be dragging yourself out of it can be a little bit hard. The book I'm doing right now, it's a World War II book and it's amazing. It came out super fast, 3.5 months, 100,000 words just out. And I have no idea how I did it. And then I thought about it and I was like, yeah, but this was over fall and the pandemic and, all this, very head up politics and news over in the United States. And I think it was part of me was so desperate to escape that it was diving, my whole subconscious was diving so happily into the World War II Russian front and saying, this is so relaxing and nice and calming in here. Can I just stay here forever until this book is done? And, the Russian front, it's such a nice Zen sort of atmosphere, but it was exactly the perfect escape that I needed. And it did feel like I was, eating, sleeping, and dreaming it.
How about you, Simon?
Particularly, it varies, I think, for me, but particularly with the case of Maxentius, I have a certain love of the bad emperors, the ones that the history has damned, the Roman emperors. I've written about several of them, and Maxentius is only the latest. But there's the idea of unpicking the villainy and trying to portray the human behind it. And I can't get out of the mindset. Once I start to work on it, I'll find that I've written a chapter, and the next morning I'll get out of bed and I'll be thinking about it. The moment I'm out of bed, I'll be standing in the shower going, of course, that's why. And downstairs for breakfast, just so that I can get in and write what I was thinking. And I think that's the case with these certain characters like Maxentius. It just occupies every thought.
Yeah, and you, Gordon?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. I was just thinking, so I started a series set in the Bronze Age a few years ago, and it was fairly new territory for me, and it involved months and months and months of just being nose deep in a book. And I remember one night, my wife and I went out for a burger and to go to the cinema, and I remember sitting down at the restaurant and trying to read the menu, and all I could see was the outline of Trojan warships and Greek warriors, and I just couldn't take in what I was seeing in front of me, and my head was just churning, thinking. It's so hard to switch off, depending on how deeply you go into it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's quite disturbing. I can't even remember if I ordered a burger or a pizza that night, but it was,
I think our families put up with a lot from us. It's weird being married to a writer. And I'm sure you guys have similar anecdotes, but I still remember one of the funnier things that ever was said in my house was there's one time my husband came home from work and I come bounding down the stairs with probably a very disturbing gleam in my eye. And I'm saying, can you get started on dinner? Because I got a guy roped to a chair, dripping blood upstairs, and it'll take me about 25 more minutes to finish him off. And then there's this long pause, and I just in the book, and it's the funny thing, he doesn't bat an eyelash. He's heard worse. He's just like, all right, do what you gotta. I'll start dinner. And this is the kind of thing our spouses get used to.
Similarly, Tracy was on the phone to her friend. My wife was on her phone to her friend, trying to arrange a session going riding. And she's talking to Catherine, and I made her stop. I just asked her a question. She turned back to Catherine. on the phone. She said, just bear with me. He's just asking me how you would make a horse bleed out least painfully.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay, so since we're close to the end, I think this is an appropriate question to end on. Essentially, how do you know that you have reached the end of a book or a story? Like, no more fussing with it. Let's start with you, Gordon.
So, yeah, I take it you mean in terms of the end of the edit or the end of...
I mean, the exact question is, how does it feel when you know that you've reached the end of a book or story? So I'm assuming, like, you're done fussing with it.
That's a good question. I think there's a definite sense of something just feels right. This is a really vague answer. So to answer it in 2 stages, the first draft, you know, when it's finished, it just slides into place and you type the end. But for me, it's the after that makes it a story, a proper story that hangs together and feels right, and it is what you wanted to express in the way you wanted to express it. And I think there's just it's just like a kind of cogs clicking into place feeling where you know that these characters are alive. I have lived, I know these, I am these characters. I've walked in their shoes. I feel everything they felt, compared to, say, the first draft, which can sometimes feel a little bit wooden, a bit perfunctory. You know, it's a form of outline. Yeah, and a familiarity, you know, just a sense that you've been in those places as opposed to you've written about them. Yeah,
I think that's a great answer. How about you, Simon?
If it's the end of a book which is going to have a sequel, the moment I finish it, I'm already in my head. I'm already plotting the next one. Usually, I'm already halfway through plotting the next one, and I'm working out, you know, what character's going to die when, who's going to be washed overboard for no readily apparent reason. If it's the end of a series, which I've done a few times now, there's this strange, probably what Gordon was saying, I think here, this strange sense of completion, but at the same time for me, loss. I think that you're not going to be writing about these people anymore. It's almost like burying someone, but at the same time, it's a sense of achievement. It's a very strange feeling.
But that you've done them well, represented them well.
Yeah, well, I would hope so.
Yeah. How about you, Kate?
Sometimes the realization that a book is done comes to me when, you know, someone's actually taking hold of my wrist and saying, you know, like, I'm taking you away from the laptop now because you need to press send because the deadline went past. And, you know, so, you know, when someone's handcuffing me to a sink so they can press send and my editor can get the book, that's when I really know it's done. All right, that aside, deadlines are a tremendous motivator to let me know when something is finished, or partly. But I hit the point after, because I do a lot of editing rounds. I do a lot of buffing and polishing. And by the time I'm done with really the final edit, there's often like just a sort of sense of weariness. Like, I can only imagine a marathoner when they've hit the wall and you've gone through the wall and you've kept running and you get to the end of it where it's like you have nothing more to give. And that can be sometimes that can be a bit of a discouraging feeling, because you can feel like, I hate this book and I don't know what I'm going to do with it anymore. But also there's sort of a little bit of a serenity in there too, because there's a feeling of like, all right, I've given this everything I've got. I don't have any more opinions on this book. I don't have any more ideas about how to make it better. I've, delved into these characters as deep as I can go. I put everything I have into it, and there's a pride in knowing that, like, you literally had nothing left to give it. And I kind of feel like if I haven't hit that wall, I haven't tried hard enough. So that's kind of where I tend to go with it. And then generally it's away from me long enough, and then when it comes back to me in ARC form, I can remember the reasons I liked it in the first place.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, well, I think that is going to end our chat for today. The two of you who are in the UK have a wonderful, I guess it's bedtime. Have a good rest of the evening. And Kate and I will have a good rest of the evening here, although not nearly as late. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to those people who watched. Kate, thank you for being our guest interviewer for today. Like I said, it makes life easy for me and makes it enjoyable. I just get to sit back and watch. So we have copies of the books available. As Kate said, I neglected to mention earlier, we do have signed book plates for Sons of Rome. So if you're interested in that, there's a link in the comments to order. And of course, we will have copies of Rose Code available as well. So everyone have a wonderful evening. Thanks again. And I'm going to say goodbye. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.